It was 4017 in the morning when the phone rang the first time. I remember the exact minute because I'd been lying awake since 3, listening to the wind throw sleet against the bedroom window like someone tossing handfuls of gravel. My wife was asleep beside me, her back turned. The comforter pulled up to her ear the way she always slept when she was angry about something the night before. The phone was my mother's neighbor, Mrs. Halloran, calling from the landline in my mother's kitchen. Her voice was the kind of calm people use when they're trying very hard not to be the second emergency. "Honey, your mom fell. She's on the kitchen floor. She's talking, but she can't get up." I sat up. The clock on the nightstand glowed red. Outside, the storm we'd been warned about for 2 days had finally arrived in full, and the trees in the front yard were bent like old men trying to keep their hats on. I asked Mrs. Halloran if she'd called an ambulance. She said she had 20 minutes ago, and dispatch told her every rig in the county was either stuck or already running. Route 9 was closed at the bridge. The state plows hadn't been through our road since around midnight. She said the EMT on the line told her if my mother was breathing and conscious, the best thing was for family to bring her in, if family could get there. My mother is 82 years old. She lives alone in the house I grew up in, 11 miles from where my wife and I live now. My truck was at Petrocelli's garage on a new transmission, had been for a week. My wife's Lexus SUV sat in the heated garage attached to the house, plugged in, charged, ready. The 4-wheel drive on that thing could climb a wall. I put my hand on my wife's shoulder. "Honey, wake up. My mother fell. I need to take your car." She didn't open her eyes. She made a sound somewhere between a sigh and a groan and pulled the comforter higher. "Did you hear me? My mom is on the floor. The ambulance can't get through. I need your keys." She rolled onto her back then, finally opened her eyes, and looked at me the way you might look at a dog that had knocked over a lamp. That's not my problem. I thought maybe I hadn't heard her right. I waited. The wind was loud outside. She turned over again, away from me, and set it into the pillow. Slower this time, like she wanted to make sure I caught every word. "It's not my problem. Figure it out yourself." There was a long second there. I've replayed that second a lot in the months since. I keep waiting to remember some flash of rage, some heat in my chest. There wasn't any. What there was something colder and clearer, like when you put your hand under a tap and the water has been running cold long enough that you stop noticing the temperature and just notice that everything has gone very still. I said, "Okay." "That's all." "Just okay." I got out of bed. I put on jeans, a flannel, my work coat. I went downstairs and pulled the spare key to the Lexus off the hook by the back door, where we'd kept both sets of keys for 31 years of marriage. I went out into the garage. I started her car. I let it warm up for 3 minutes while I scraped the inside of the windshield where my breath had fogged it. Then I drove 11 miles in a sleet storm at 15 miles an hour, with the hazards on, to my mother's house. My mother's. Halloran had a blanket under my mother's head and a kitchen towel pressed against her forehead where she'd hit the corner of the counter on the way down. My mother looked up at me, and the first thing she said was, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." I tried to make coffee. I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. I told her she was going to be fine. I carried her, because she weighs about 90 pounds now, out to the Lexus, and Mrs. Halloran followed with my mother's purse and a coat draped over her arm. It took us almost an hour to get to the hospital. The roads were a sheet. There were 2 cars in the ditch on the way, and a fire truck stuck sideways at the bottom of the hill on Mill Road. Nobody passed us. The world had emptied out. I sat with my mother in the ER for the next 9 hours. She had a hairline fracture in her hip, a concussion, and pneumonia in her left lung that nobody had caught yet because she'd been calling her cough just a tickle for 2 weeks. The doctor, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 35, told me my mother probably would have died if she'd stayed on that kitchen floor for another 4 hours. Hypothermia. The thermostat had been set low to save on heating. My wife called me at 6:42 that morning while I was in the waiting area drinking the worst coffee I have ever tasted. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 7:11, and 7:18, and 7:34. I let them all go. She left one voicemail. I listened to it sitting in the corner chair, with my phone pressed to my ear and the rain still hammering against the window glass. She sounded annoyed. She wanted to know where her car was. She wanted to know where her car was. She wanted to know why I'd taken it without asking. She wanted to know when I was bringing it back, because she had a hot yoga class at 9 and she'd need it for the studio. That was the message. Not, is your mother okay? Not, how can I help? Her car. Her class. 9 a.m. I didn't call back. I put the phone in my jacket pocket and went to sit with my mother. I'd been quiet for a long time before that morning. People who know me would say I am a quiet man by nature, and they wouldn't be wrong. I worked 36 years as a structural engineer for a firm out of Hartford. I designed bridges, mostly. Bridges teach you something about patience. You sit with the load calculations for weeks before you pour a single yard of concrete. You don't argue with the numbers. You don't get loud. The numbers either work or they don't, and if they don't, the bridge falls down and people die. So you learn to wait, and you learn to listen, and you learn that the most dangerous thing in the world is a man who is sure of himself and doesn't bother to check his own math. I had been checking my math on my marriage for about 6 months by then. It had started in September, when I went to deposit a refund check from the IRS into our joint savings and noticed the balance was about $30,000 lower than it should have been. I figured it was an error. I called the bank. The teller, an older woman who'd known us both for years, paused a long time before she told me there were no errors. The withdrawals had been steady $2,000 and $3,000 at a time since the previous spring, all transferred to an account at a different bank in my wife's name only. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Then I drove home, made myself a sandwich, and didn't say a word about it. You have to understand, I wasn't being a coward. I was being an engineer. When a bridge shows you a crack, you don't pull the supports out the next morning. You measure. You take core samples. You find out what the actual structure looks like before you decide what has to come down. So for 6 months, while my wife went to her hot yoga and her wine club and her weekend retreats with friends, I had stopped meeting because she said I made things tense. I quietly measured. I pulled 5 years of joint statements and put them in a banker's box in the back of my workshop. I made a folder for the credit cards. I made a folder for the mortgage. I found the deed to our house and made a copy. I found the deed to the lake cabin my father had left to me in my name only, before I ever met my wife, and made sure it was still where I'd put it in the safe deposit box, and made sure my wife's name had never been added to it the way she'd asked me 3 different times to do over the years. I had always said I'd get around to it. I never had. Some part of me, even before I had any reason, must have known. I made a folder for her phone records, which we shared on a family plan, and noticed that she had been calling and texting the same number in Providence, 3 to 5 times a day for at least 18 months. I didn't run the name. I didn't have to. The Providence number belonged to her college boyfriend, a man named Marshall Beaumont, who I had met exactly once at a class reunion in 2009. He had shaken my hand at that reunion with both of his and held it about 2 seconds too long, looking at my wife the whole time. I had noticed. I had filed it. Engineers file things. In October, I retained a lawyer, a man my old college roommate recommended, who practiced family law out of an office in Springfield, an hour from our town, where nobody we knew would see me walking in. His name was Howard Strickland, and he was about my age, with white hair and reading glasses on a chain and a quiet, careful way of asking questions. I liked him. I told him everything. He told me what I needed to do to protect myself, and we started doing it. By the time my wife told me my mother's emergency wasn't her problem, I had already moved most of my retirement savings into accounts in my name only. I had filed a homestead declaration. I had gotten the cabin reappraised. I had documented every dollar she'd siphoned from the joint accounts. I had a draft of a divorce filing sitting in Howard's desk drawer in Springfield, waiting for the day I told him to file it. The day was that day. sitting in a hospital chair with the worst coffee in the world going cold in my hand, listening to my mother's monitor beep through the curtain, thinking about a woman who was on her way to hot yoga. I called Howard from the hallway at 9:30. He answered on the second ring. I asked him if he was free Monday. He said he was. I said, file it. He paused. He said, you sure, friend? I said I had never been more sure of anything in my life. I drove my wife's Lexus home at 6 that evening, after they'd admitted my mother to her room and gotten her stable and given her something to help her sleep. The roads had been salted by then. The trees were dripping. The world looked like a wet wool blanket. My wife was sitting at the kitchen island when I came in through the garage. She'd ordered takeout from the Thai place. She was on her phone, scrolling with a glass of white wine. She didn't look up. Where have you been all day? I had to Uber to yoga. Do you know what an Uber out here costs? I set the keys on the counter. I took off my coat. I hung it on the hook by the door. I said, my mother fell. She broke her hip. She has pneumonia. She almost died on the kitchen floor. My wife looked up then. Her face did something complicated. It tried to assemble concern. It didn't quite make it. Well, is she okay? She'll live. Good, that's good. She picked up her wine. You could have told me where you were going. I was worried. I looked at her for a long time. I wasn't angry. I want you to understand that. I was tired and I was clear. I said you weren't worried. You wanted your car. She set the wine down. She started to say something. I held up my hand. Just slightly. Just enough to stop her. I'm going to bed. We'll talk tomorrow. She didn't say anything. I think, at that exact second, somewhere underneath everything, she knew. People always know. The body knows before the mind catches up. I slept in the guest room. I slept hard, actually. The deep, dreamless sleep of a man who has finally stopped carrying something. Monday morning at 8:45 a.m., Howard Strickland walked into the county courthouse in Springfield and filed for divorce on my behalf. By 10:30, a process server in a brown jacket was ringing my front doorbell, where my wife answered in her workout clothes with a coffee in her hand. I was at the hospital. My mother was being moved to a step-down unit. The phone in my coat pocket started buzzing at 10,047. The first call I let go. The second one, too. By the time my mother was settled in her new room and I had a chance to look at my phone, there were 19 missed calls and 12 text messages. By that night, there were 47. The messages went through the stages all in one day. Confusion first. What is this? What is going on? Why is there a man at the door? Then anger. How dare you? You did this behind my back. Who do you think you are? Then bargaining. We can fix this. We've been together 31 years. We can go to counseling. I made a mistake. Then crying, please pick up. Please, I'm scared. Please pick up the phone. I didn't pick up the phone. I sat with my mother. She ate a little applesauce. She held my hand. She asked me how my wife was, and I told her my wife was fine. Because there was no reason for an 82-year-old woman with a fractured hip and pneumonia to carry one more thing. I told her later, 2 weeks later when she was home and stable, sitting in her recliner with a blanket on her lap, I told her everything. The money, the phone records, the lawyer, the morning of the storm. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I was done, she reached out and put her thin hand over mine, and she said the only thing I needed her to say. You're my good boy. You always have been. I never liked her. I laughed. I'd been waiting 40 years to hear that. The divorce took 11 months. My wife fought it at first. She hired a lawyer who tried to argue that my retirement transfers were a fraudulent conveyance, that the cabin was a marital asset, that she had been emotionally abandoned and was entitled to spousal support. Howard had been ready for all of it. The cabin was bulletproof because I'd never commingled it. The retirement transfers were legitimate because they had happened before any filing with money I had earned into accounts that were still subject to equitable division. And equity, it turned out, ran in my direction once the forensic accountant got done documenting the $38,000 she had moved to her separate account over 15 months, and the additional $22,000 she had spent on a man in Providence whose American Express bill came up in discovery because she'd been paying part of it from our joint card. Marshall Beaumont, as it turned out, was unemployed. Had been for 2 years. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a pizza place. My wife had been wiring him money since before the previous Christmas. She had been planning, I think, to leave, to take what she could and go. The hot yoga and the wine club and the weekend retreats were never about wellness. They were about logistics. She was making her exit. She just hadn't pulled the trigger yet because she was waiting for the right moment, and the moment kept not arriving, because the man in Providence kept not actually being ready to receive her. What she did not know, the morning she rolled over in bed and told me her mother-in-law's emergency was not her problem, was that I had already pulled the trigger 6 months before. I just hadn't told her. I was waiting on my numbers, the way you wait on a bridge. The judgment came down on a Tuesday in October. She got the house, which had a mortgage on it almost equal to its value because the market had cooled, and she had insisted years before on the second mortgage to pay for the kitchen renovation she had wanted. She got her car, she got her clothes, she got a third of the joint savings that remained after the forensic accountant flagged the missing $60,000, which the judge ordered her to make whole. She did not get the cabin. She did not get my pension. She did not get my pension. She did not get the boat. She did not get spousal support. She got, in essence, the exact life she had been building in secret, except now she had to live it openly, with no one funding it but herself. The man in Providence, by the way, didn't take her in. I heard this through a cousin of hers who still spoke to me. He'd been seeing someone else the whole time. He vanished when the money stopped. My mother lived another 2 years. Good years. She moved out of the old house and into a small place I bought for her 4 blocks from mine, single story, no stairs, with a sunroom that got morning light. She liked to sit there with the cat she finally let me get her, a big orange Tom who slept on her lap. She passed in her sleep, in her own bed, on a Sunday morning in spring. The doctor said her heart simply stopped. He said it was the most peaceful death he'd seen in a long time. I held her hand for an hour after she was gone. She was the last person on this earth who had known me as a boy. People sometimes ask me when the subject comes up, usually at a dinner with old friends, where someone has had a glass of wine too many and feels brave enough to mention it, whether I regret how I handled it, whether I should have confronted my wife sooner, whether the long silence, the months of measurement, the quiet preparation, was its own kind of cruelty. I think about that question seriously, because I don't want to lie about myself. I don't want to be the man who tells himself a story that flatters him. Here is what I have come to. I do not regret it. I would do it the same way again, not because it felt good. It didn't feel good. Most days while I was building that case, I felt sick. I felt like a stranger in my own house. I would look across the dinner table at a woman I had known for 3 decades and feel like I was looking through smoked glass. But I also know this. The morning of the storm, when she rolled over in our bed and said what she said, she didn't say it because she was tired. She didn't say it because we had been fighting. She said it because somewhere inside her, she had stopped seeing my mother as a person who could need anything from her. She had stopped seeing me as a person who could need anything from her. We had become inconveniences in the foreground of a life she was already living in her head, somewhere else, with someone else. A person who can say, "Figure it out yourself," about an 82-year-old woman on a kitchen floor is not a person who is going to be reached by a confrontation. There is no fight you can have with that. There is no counseling session that brings that back. What there is the truth applied carefully with documentation. I learned something in those 6 months that I wish I had learned at 30 instead of 62. Silence is not weakness. Patience is not surrender. When somebody shows you, plainly and without theatrics, who they have decided to be, the most powerful thing you can do is believe them on the first try. Believe them and then build quietly, the door you are going to walk out of. I am 64 years old now. I live alone in a small house I bought after the divorce on a piece of land at the edge of my mother's old town. I have a workshop in the back where I still do consulting work for the firm, 2 or 3 days a week, mostly bridges. I have a dog, a black lab named Hopper, who is afraid of thunder, but not much else. I have my mother's orange cat, who has decided in his old age that I am acceptable. I have a small group of friends. I have my health. I do not have a wife, and I do not look for one. Sometimes in the evenings the phone will ring with an unknown number, and I will let it go to voicemail. And I will think about the 47 calls that came in on a Monday in October, 3 years ago, while a man in a brown jacket was handing my wife a piece of paper at our front door. She left a message after the last one that night. She was crying. She said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please call me back. I didn't mean it. I would have driven her. I would have driven her if I'd known you would do this." That, right there, if I'd known you would do this. That, right there, if I'd known you would do this, not if I'd known she was dying, not if I'd known how bad it was, if I'd known there would be consequences. I saved that voicemail. I don't listen to it. I just kept it. Sometimes you keep a thing, not because you want to hear it again, but because you want to remember that you didn't make it up. The bridge held. That's what I tell myself when I think about that whole stretch of time. The bridge held because I checked my math. The bridge held because I didn't try to make a load-bearing wall out of a woman who was already gone. The bridge held because somewhere deep down I trusted what I had seen, and I built around it, slowly, in the dark, the way an old engineer builds. If you're sitting somewhere listening to this, with the comforter pulled up around someone whose back is already turned to you in your own bed, listen to me carefully. You are not crazy. You are not paranoid. You are not making it up. Believe what you see. Check your math. Take your time. And when the moment comes, and it will come, say, okay. Quietly. Just okay. The rest will take care of itself. I have thought a great deal in the years since that storm about why a person ends up where they end up. Not the storm itself, not the kitchen floor, not the 47 calls. The deeper architecture underneath all of it. The reason a bridge falls, or doesn't. My wife did not become a person who could say, "Figure it out yourself," about an 82-year-old woman overnight. She became that person one small decision at a time, over years, in moments nobody was watching. Every time she chose her own comfort over someone else's need, every time she told herself a little story about why she deserved more than she was giving, every dollar she moved into that other account told her a little more about who she was willing to be. By the morning of the storm, she wasn't choosing. She was just being who she had practiced being. That is the part I want anyone listening to understand. Character is not something you have. Character is something you build, slowly, in the small hours when nobody is keeping score. And the bill always comes due, not because some invisible hand is tallying it up, but because the person you have been practicing being is the person you will be when the storm hits and the kitchen floor is cold and somebody you love is on it. I build my own character for better and worse in those same small hours. The patience came from 40 years of bridges. The clarity came from a father who taught me that you do not yell at a problem. You measure it. The strength to wait 6 months without saying a word came from somewhere I don't fully understand. But I think it came from my mother, who raised me alone after my father died, and who never once in my life complained about anything she didn't have the power to change. If there is a lesson here, and I am suspicious of lessons, it is this. Be careful what you practice. Be careful what you let slide. Be careful what you tell yourself you deserve. The world is not cruel. The world is mostly indifferent, but the people you love are not indifferent, and they are watching, and they are filing, the way engineers file. And one day, when you say the thing you have been quietly preparing yourself to say, you will discover that they heard you all the times before, And they have been building too. I am 64. I sleep alone. I have a dog and a cat and a workshop and a small group of friends and a mother buried in a cemetery I visit on Sundays. I am not lonely. I am clear. There is a difference, and at my age, the second one is worth more than the first. Build the bridge. Check your math. Believe what you see. And when somebody shows you who they are, on a cold morning in your own bed, do not argue with them. Thank them quietly for the information, and then go do what you already know you have to do.